The 9,954th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen. Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. And Madam Samar Nasser, Chief Executive Officer, Yemen Aid. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Hans Grunberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it has been a deeply volatile and unpredictable period in the region, marked by shifting dynamics and fragile hopes for de-escalation. We all welcome the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, hoping it would create the space needed for diplomacy to regain momentum, including in Yemen. But against the backdrop of negotiations for a ceasefire in Gaza, we have witnessed multiple missile attacks by Nasrallah against Israel during the reporting period, and we are now, with grave concern, seeing an escalation in the Red Sea with attacks on 2 commercial ships earlier this week by Nasrallah, resulting in civilian loss of life and casualties, as well as the potential for environmental damage. These were the first attacks on commercial vessels in over 7 months. In response, Israeli airstrikes have hit Sana'a earlier in the reporting period, as well as the ports of Hodeidah, Ras Issa, and Salif, and a power station on Sunday. Freedom of navigation in the Red Sea must be safeguarded, and civilian infrastructure must never become target of conflict. Above all, Yemen must not be drawn deeper into regional crises that threaten to unravel the already extremely fragile situation in the country. The stakes for Yemen are simply too high. Yemen's future depends on our collective resolve to shield it from further suffering and to give its people the hope and dignity they so deeply deserve. Mr. President, whilst by and large the front lines in Yemen continue to hold, the situation remains fragile and unpredictable. There has been a continuation of military activity in governorates such as Al-Dale, Al-Jawf, Marib, Taiz, and Sada. I'm also concerned about troop movements towards Al-Dale, Marib, and Taiz. And I recognize that for some, on both sides of the conflict, the appetite for a military escalation remains. A military solution, however, remains a dangerous illusion that risks deepening Yemen's suffering. While negotiations may not be easy, they offer the best hope for addressing, in a sustainable and long-term manner, the complexity of the conflict. However, it is urgent to move forward, as time is not on our side. The longer the conflict is drawn out, the more complex it becomes. There is a risk that divisions could deepen further, and therefore it is important for both sides to not engage in any unilateral activity to the detriment of all Yemenis. Both sides must signal a genuine willingness to explore peaceful avenues and create conditions for lasting stability. And an important signal in this regard would be the release of all remaining conflict-related detainees, a process that has stagnated for over a year. There is nothing strategic in prolonging the suffering of families that have already waited far too long for the return of their loved ones. The parties agreed on an all-for-all release, and now it is time for them to fulfill that commitment. Turning to the economy, across Yemen, the little money people do have in their pockets is either falling in value or literally falling apart. Concern among citizens and across the private sector over the dire countrywide economic situation is increasing. Also increasing, tragically, is the food insecurity and threat of famine. The economy has, in effect, become the most active frontline. But as I have said before, the economy is an area where practical collaboration between the parties can create meaningful change and immediately and positively impact the lives of Yemenis. In recent weeks, we've welcomed the opening of the Al Dali Road that has increased freedom of movement and expanded avenues for economic activity. This demonstrates what is possible. I call on the parties to engage in moving forward on tangible and practical measures that would facilitate the full and timely payment of salaries, increase the purchasing powers of Yemenis, improve the service delivery, and stimulate the economy. This was the focus of my discussion with the newly appointed Prime Minister Salim bin Break when I was in Aden last week, and includes enabling the government of Yemen to resume oil and gas production and exports. Mr. President, in the coming months, a positive shift towards greater stability in the region would certainly be welcome and could create an environment for Yemen to move forward. But this cannot be a precondition for change. Yemen must advance regardless, moving from simply managing shocks and volatility to developing practical steps that lay the groundwork for lasting solutions. To make this possible, 3 core areas must be prioritized. First, supporting de-escalation along the front lines and working with the parties on the parameters for a nationwide ceasefire. My office will continue its active engagement through the Military Coordination Committee and with other senior military and security representatives to promote an inclusive security dialogue that can build trust between the parties at national and local level. Second, establishing a path for talks between the parties. The elements of the roadmap are familiar to you. Alongside a ceasefire are economic and humanitarian measures and a political process. My office will continue to work with the parties at all levels on options to advance progress on these issues. We will also continue expanding our engagement to ensure the broader concerns and aspirations of the Yemeni people are heard and reflected. Third, I will continue to work with the region and international community on the broader security guarantees that are needed, including on freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. First and foremost, Yemenis need to have confidence in any agreement reached. The region and international community, however, also need to have confidence that their concerns are met. This is how we build a durable support structure for a negotiated settlement. Mr. President, within Yemen, civil society and their ability to effect change will also be an important part of that support structure. When I was in Aden, I met with a diverse group of women political representatives, civil society leaders, and grassroots activists. It is their bold and courageous voices, and those of many across Yemen, that compel me to reiterate today the urgent need to preserve and expand civic space. This is critical for the future of Yemen. I end by reiterating my call for the unconditional and immediate release by Ansar Allah of all those arbitrarily detained from the United Nations, national and international NGOs, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions. The number of cases requiring urgent medical attention are increasing. They need access to medical assistance. They need to be home with their families. We will not let this issue drop. Our detained colleagues are not forgotten, not by me or my mission, nor by all of us in the United Nations working tirelessly for the sake of the Yemeni population. Mr. President, I remain deeply grateful to the members of this Council for your steadfast support for Yemen and for my mediation efforts. A consistent and coordinated message from this Council strengthens the international community's resolve to pursue a negotiated settlement. Your continued backing is essential to reinforcing the tools of diplomacy and fostering an environment where compromise, dialogue, and ultimately lasting peace can take root. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank also the Special Envoy Grunberg for his briefing, and to this Council for your sustained interest in Yemen. As the Special Envoy described, a political solution remains the only path towards a better future for the people of Yemen. And every day without progress prolongs the suffering for millions of people. You have been clear as a Council. International humanitarian law is not optional. Civilians must be protected. The infrastructure they rely on must not be targeted. You have been equally clear about the damaging impact of the detention of UN and NGO colleagues. They must be immediately released without conditions. Mr. President, the food security crisis in Yemen has been steadily accelerating since late 2023. Today, more than 17 million people in Yemen are going hungry. That number could climb to over 18 million between September and February. Over 1 million children under the age of 5 are suffering from life-threatening acute malnutrition. And that number could also surge to 1.2 million by early next year, leaving many at risk of permanent physical and cognitive damage. We haven't seen this level of deprivation since before the UN brokered truce in early 2022. Communities, as we've heard in Hajj, Hodeidah, and Amran governorates, are sliding back into acute food insecurity and famine-like conditions. Of course, this deterioration is unfolding just as global funding is plummeting, reducing our ability to feed the most vulnerable men, women, and children. The funding gap is also extreme for life-saving health and protection services, especially for the 6.2 million women and girls facing the threat of gender-based violence. And support for survivors is severely under-resourced, putting countless lives at risk and pushing essential services to the brink of collapse. Mr. President, with support from this Council and our donors, we can turn this around, just as we have done in the past. My humanitarian colleagues on the ground are doing everything possible to save as many lives as we can with the funding we have. As part of the wider humanitarian reset, we have prioritized reaching the most vulnerable people and finding smarter, swifter ways to deliver aid. So, for example, we've been able to keep cholera in check by zeroing in on community-level awareness and hygiene promotion, while also targeting health and sanitation support to the most acute hotspots. As a result, cholera cases are down by over 70% compared to last year, a significant step forward in a country where cholera is a constant threat. We are also implementing new strategies to sustain critical nutrition services. Through a new simplified protocol, our partners are maximizing the use of ready-to-use therapeutic food. And as a result, more than 650,000 children with high-risk, moderate, acute malnutrition are now receiving cost-effective, life-saving treatment, while over 3,200 health facilities will continue to provide quality healthcare to 7.2 million people in need, despite significant resource constraints. Also aligned to the reset, we are empowering those closest and best placed to respond to the needs of the communities that we serve. 65% of the allocations this year from our Yemen Humanitarian Fund, our country-based pooled fund, have gone to local and national NGOs. A third of those organizations led by women. Mr. President, as we noted last month, there are other signs of hope. Under the leadership of the UN Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator, an agreement has been reached between local authorities on both sides of the front line in Tai's governorate to jointly manage water supply systems and restore access to water for tens of thousands of households after years of deprivation. To accelerate people's access to safe water, the Yemen Humanitarian Fund is now investing $2 million to connect 90,000 people, including displaced families, to reliable water networks. And with the continued cooperation from the authorities and sustained support from our donors, we plan to scale up these efforts so that 600,000 people in Thais can access clean water. Importantly, this means that these people will no longer have to depend on humanitarian support to meet their water needs. And last month, we briefed this council on another community-led breakthrough, the reopening of a key road between Aden and Sana'a, reconnecting communities, providing faster access to health and other essential services for many, and vastly reducing travel time between those two cities. I'm happy to report that increased civilian and commercial traffic has resumed along this road for the first time in 7 years. And we're also working with our partners to clear unexploded ordnance along that route to reduce the risk for civilians. Mr. President, the people of Yemen continue to need this council's support, as do our humanitarian workers responding with such courage and tenacity. Mr. President, since my last briefing to this council, I've set out a hyper-prioritized global plan to save 114 million lives, with just 1% of what the world spent on defense last year. I've described today what we can achieve with even limited funding in Yemen, getting cholera down 70%, backing local NGOs, reaching hundreds of thousands of children who were malnourished, getting access to clean water for hundreds of thousands, and opening vital roads. We can do so much more if you back us. So, alongside support for the Special Envoy's vital efforts, we ask, firstly, for increased funding to scale up emergency food and nutrition support. Secondly, for your continued welcome efforts to secure the immediate unconditional release of our detained UN, NGO, and civil society colleagues. And third, for your active steps to uphold international humanitarian law, to protect civilians, protect humanitarians, and ensure access to those in need. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Fletcher for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Samar Nasser.
Mr. President, Excellencies, and distinguished colleagues, first and foremost, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the Permanent Mission of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for its continued efforts to shed the light on the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and for its kind invitation that has granted me the opportunity to address this esteemed council regarding one of the most complex crises in our contemporary world. My name is Samar Nasser Aliafi, the CEO of Yemen Aid, a humanitarian and development organization working on the ground to provide comprehensive and sustainable support to communities affected by a war that has devastated the country for more than a decade. I speak to you not from a distance, nor from theoretical analysis, but from lived experience. As a Yemeni American, I made the decision to relocate to Yemen in 2022, choosing to be close to my people and to contribute practically to the path of change. I come to you today from the capital of Aden, carrying with me real stories from the ground where millions are enduring an unbearable and urgent reality, one marked by darkness, hunger, and despair. In entire cities, electricity is cut for more than 20 hours a day, and deadly summer heat becomes a daily threat to the lives of patients, children, and the elderly. The local currency, as you are aware, continues to collapse without control, and markets are boiling with unaffordable prices, while public sector salaries have been suspended for months, leaving families at the mercy of poverty and hunger and forcing mothers to choose between medicine for their children or a meager meal to survive another day. In recent months, I have witnessed the devastating impact of the sudden decline in international humanitarian funding, particularly due to shifts in donor priorities. This has led to the cessation of food distributions, the closure of health facilities, and the suspension of cash transfer programs, leaving hundreds of thousands facing an uncertain future. To make matters worse, the suffering of Yemenis have been exacerbated by the deliberate targeting of commercial and humanitarian vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden by the Houthi militia. Many of these ships carried shipments of grain, medicine, and essential food supplies. These attacks, an emerging form of piracy, not only threaten international maritime security and safety, but also severely disrupt the delivery of vital supplies to the country's ports, deepening the food security crisis and causing a dramatic spike in the prices of basic commodities in a country where it is already suffering from an economic paralysis and deliberate starvation tactics. At the same time, the Houthi militia continue to violate the rights of humanitarian workers through arbitrary detentions, harassment, and restrictions on both international and local organizations, including UN agencies. We hold this militia fully responsible for the safety of our detained colleagues and call for their immediate and unconditional release. On the other hand, we must commend the growing cooperation we have experienced from the internationally recognized Yemeni government, particularly in the southern regions, which now host nearly half of the country's population due to ongoing violations in Houthi-controlled areas. We also appreciate the efforts of the local authorities in the capital, Aden, despite limited resources, the pressure of displacement, and multiple security and economic challenges. The local government has demonstrated a sincere will to work and an ability to coordinate with humanitarian partners, which deserves both support and recognition. Nonetheless, structural challenges persist. Local authorities continue to suffer from weak institutional frameworks, scarce resources, and a lack of technical support, making them heavily dependent on international assistance to provide basic services. At the higher leadership level, the Presidential Leadership Council still faces serious obstacles in fulfilling its mandate due to the absence of regulatory frameworks governing the relationship between its components and the executive authority, in addition to internal political divisions that have slowed the pace of reform and created institutional and administrative vacuums that require urgent attention. Mr. President, Excellencies, my people really do not need words of sympathy alone. They need a genuine partnership that places human dignity at the heart of its priorities and drives towards a just and sustainable peace.
I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to start by thanking Special Envoy Grunberg, USG Fletcher, and Ms. Nasser for your briefings. You've given us very clearly 12 recommendations, 3 from the Special Envoy, 3 from the Undersecretary General, and 6 from Ms. Nasser. Thank you for your clarity. I'd like to make 3 points. First, the UK, like our briefers, strongly condemns the reckless Houthi attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. They've led to the tragic loss of life of innocent mariners. They undermine maritime security and global trade and pose a significant risk to the environment. The UK remains committed to countering the threat posed by the Houthis and restoring freedom of navigation. We will continue to work with partners and support the Special Envoy in a coordinated international approach to achieve these goals. Moreover, the Houthis' continued smuggling of weapons into Yemen is a clear violation of the arms embargo, as implemented by Resolution 2216. The UN verification and inspection mechanism is critical to ensure compliance with the arms embargo and prevent smuggling of illicit arms. So the UK calls on the international community to redouble efforts to enforce compliance with the arms embargo, disrupt the illegal weapons flow, and support the critical role of the UN verification and inspection mechanism in this regard. Second, as USG Fletcher reminded us, and Ms. Nasser too, Yemen is experiencing a significant deterioration in food security. The FAO's food security phase classification for Yemen notes, as USG Fletcher said, that the number of Yemenis experiencing food insecurity is predicted to rise by over 1 million to 18.1 million by February next year. This year, the UK's Food Security Safety Nets programme will provide $79 million of assistance to help feed at least 864,000 Yemenis and to support the government of Yemen's economic reforms to design a more coherent and coordinated response. As others have said, the Houthis' continued arbitrary and cruel detention of aid workers are undermining efforts to meet the needs of Yemenis. The UK condemns these unjustified detentions, and I reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all those detained. Finally, President, Yemenis have suffered for far too long a toxic combination of insecurity and dire humanitarian conditions. Now is the time to redouble our efforts towards an inclusive and sustainable peace. The UK remains committed to supporting the UN Special Envoy's work to deliver this. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Special Envoy Grandberg and USG Fletcher for their briefings. I have also listened carefully to the statement of the civil society representative, Ms. Nasser, and welcome the presence of the representative of Yemen at today's meeting. I'd like to make 5 points. First, China expresses its deep concern over the recent armed attacks on 2 cargo ships in the Red Sea and reiterates its call on the Houthis to respect the navigation rights of commercial vessels of all countries in the Red Sea in accordance with international law, to desist from targeting commercial vessels and to maintain the safety of waterways in the Red Sea. Second, China is concerned about the new round of exchange of fire between the Houthis and Israel and the worsening trend of developments. We call on all parties to exercise calm and restraint and refrain from actions that escalate tensions. The protection of civilians and the security of civilian infrastructure is an international obligation that must be observed by all parties. The respect of sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of states is a basic principle that must be adhered to by all. Third, China welcomes that with assistance of the UN, the agreement has been reached between Taiz City and the Al Haban on the joint management of the water supply systems. This positive development demonstrates that peace, development, and cooperation are the common aspirations of the Yemeni people. We expect all parties to the conflict in Yemen to display political will, strengthen dialogue and communication, gradually build mutual trust, and create conditions for a final political settlement to the Yemeni issue. China supports Special Envoy Grandberg to scale up his mediation efforts and expects the regional countries to play a greater role to this end. Fourth, China calls on the international community to step up humanitarian assistance to Yemen and to help alleviate the humanitarian crisis on the ground. In this process, the safety and security of UN personnel and humanitarian workers should be effectively guaranteed. Fifth, the resolution of the issues in Yemen and the Red Sea cannot be achieved without the easing and de-escalation of the overall situation in the region. The war in Gaza should stop at an early date. The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza should come to an end at an early date. The two-state solution should be implemented at an early date, and the postponed high-level conference on the implementation of the two-state solution should be convened at an early date. In conclusion, the ceasefire agreement between Israel, the US, and Iran should be observed. The sovereignty of a state should be respected, and the purposes of and the principles of the UN Charter should be adhered to. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Panama is grateful to the presidency of this council for convening this meeting. We're also grateful to the Special Envoy for the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, and to the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher, for their valuable briefings. We also welcome Ms. Summer Nasser, Chief Executive Officer of Yemen Aid. We welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen at this meeting. The situation in Yemen continues to worsen with each passing day. There are alarmingly high levels of food insecurity in the country. More than 5.2 million people are facing emergency levels of acute food insecurity. At the same time, 11.9 million are in a situation of crisis. This is a reality which, according to a number of forecasts, could worsen yet further still. This picture hammers home the fact that there is an urgent need for this council to remain committed to the Yemeni people, a people who remain trapped in a protracted conflict. We reiterate our full support for Secretary General Special Envoy Hans Grunberg in his laudable efforts to bring the Yemeni parties towards a just, inclusive and sustainable political solution. Moreover, we underscore the importance of maintaining ongoing dialogue with local actors, including civil society representatives, and in particular with women. Their voices are vital if we are to build inclusive and sustainable solutions which could lead to a lasting and representative peace. Against that backdrop, it is in our view appropriate to renew both the resolution on the Red Sea as well as the mandate of the United Nations mission to support the Hodeidah Agreement. The mission's ceasefire monitoring work in the governorate remains vital. Hodeidah is not only a pivotal site in terms of the delivery of humanitarian assistance, it is also a key front in the struggle to reduce tensions. In view of the continued worsening of the humanitarian situation in Yemen, it would be wise for the Council to maintain and bolster its commitment to the mechanisms which promote the stability and protection of the civilian population. Mr. President, the illegal and unjustified attacks waged against merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea by the Houthis once again are threatening maritime security and the freedom of navigation. We cannot allow the Houthis to resume these reprehensible these acts of systematic terror. They jeopardize human lives, they gravely affect global supply chains, and they hinder the entry of essential humanitarian aid, as well as weakening political prospects. Mr. President, since taking up our seat on the Security Council, we have condemned and will continue to roundly condemn these acts. They must not be tolerated nor normalized by the international community under any circumstances. In that same vein, it is to be noted with regret that since our last meeting, no progress has been made in connection with the illegal and unjustified detention of UN personnel by the Houthis. Consequently, we firmly reiterate our urgent call for the immediate and unconditional release of all those arbitrarily detained, including UN representatives, representatives of NGOs, be they national or international, as well as members of civil society and the diplomatic corps. Moreover, we remind all parties of their obligation to exercise the utmost restraint and to refrain from provocations or unilateral acts actions which, far from contributing to a solution, simply worsen the conflict. The military escalation does not only imperil the very lives and well-being of the civilian population, it also deeply undermines the diplomatic efforts underway, because it imperils the hope of achieving a just and lasting peace, the peace that Yemen and its people legitimately desire and deserve. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Panama for his statement. I would now like to give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Somalia. We thank today's briefers, Special Envoy Grunberg and USG Fletcher, for their valuable updates, and take note of the contribution of Ms. Samar Nasser. We also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in this briefing. Mr. President, on the security front, the A3 is deeply concerned by recent developments in Yemen and the broader region. The recent escalations between the Houthis and Israel is especially alarming and will have far-reaching implications for international peace. We condemn all violations of international law and stress that these tensions are closely linked to the unresolved conflict in Gaza. We also underscore the need to secure an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Not only will this alleviate the suffering in the occupied Palestinian territory, but will prevent further escalations and spillovers across the region. We welcome and encourage continued diplomatic efforts, particularly by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, to secure an immediate and lasting ceasefire in Gaza. The Council must support all genuine efforts towards de-escalation and stability. Sustained international support for such initiatives is essential for broader de-escalation and for restoring a credible political process in Yemen. The recently reported Houthi attacks on commercial shipping risk undoing months of maritime calm and threaten global trade. The A3+ expresses concern regarding the renewed airstrikes conducted by Israel over the course of 6th and 7th of July in Hodeidah Governorate. Such actions endanger the lives of civilians and raise the prospect of a wider conflict. We urge Israel to cease further provocations and recommit to de-escalation. The A3+ stresses the urgent need for coordinated efforts to protect civilians and reduce tensions in Yemen. All parties must uphold international humanitarian law, particularly the Fourth Geneva Convention, and take steps to prevent civilian harm and the militarization of populated areas. We commend the continued engagement that has yielded tangible outcomes, such as the reopening of roads, the resolution of local disputes through direct dialogue, and the use of coordination channels established under the 2022 truce. We welcome the agreement reached between local water and sanitation corporations in Taiz and Al-Houban to jointly manage water supply systems. This constructive step contributes to the restoration of essential services and alleviates the suffering of affected populations in one of Yemen's most water-stressed governorates. Mr. President, humanitarian and health conditions in Yemen remain grave. The spread of malaria, dengue, and cholera is overwhelming the healthcare system. We thus echo OCHA's appeal for immediate international support and urge for safe and unhindered humanitarian access across Yemen. Failure to act risks catastrophic consequences for millions, especially people in vulnerable situations. Moreover, the worsening food security situation, especially in Aden, Lahj, Ma'rib, and Ta'iz, due to reduced food availability and limited access, demand urgent attention. We urge the international community to urgently scale up humanitarian support to Yemen to prevent widespread hunger in light of the latest IPC projection for September 2025 and February 2026, where 52% of the country's population is expected to face phase 3 or above levels of food insecurity. The A3+ fully supports the Special Envoy's effort to facilitate a Yemeni-led and a Yemeni-owned political process in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions. Only an inclusive political solution can bring lasting peace to Yemen. We join the Secretary General in calling on the Houthis to immediately and unconditionally release all UN and humanitarian personnel being detained in violation of international law. Mr. President, in conclusion, the A3+ stands in solidarity with the people of Yemen. We urge all parties to demonstrate restraint, commit to peace, and engage in constructive dialogue. We call on this Council to support and protect Yemen's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and recognize the tireless efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg and regional actors, notably Saudi Arabia and Oman. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And since this is my first time in the Council with you as our President, I want to wish you every success this month. Thank you also, Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Samar Nasser for your informative briefings. I would also like to welcome the permanent representative of the Republic of Yemen. The Houthis continue to be a destabilizing presence in the region. In recent days, the Houthis have attacked 2 commercial vessels in the Red Sea, leading to the loss of life, injury to sailors, and sinking of a cargo ship, Magic Seas. The United States condemns these attacks, which interfere with freedom of navigation. The Houthis also joined Iran in launching drone and missile attacks, continuing as recently as July 5th. Israel has the right to defend itself, and we stand with Israel in its right of self-defense against the Houthis. The Houthis continue to abuse their fellow Yemenis and to hold their country captive. This includes the unjust detention of a large number of staff from UN, NGOs, and diplomatic missions. Once again, the United States calls on the Houthis to immediately and unconditionally release all of those detainees. The recent Houthi attacks in the Red Sea demonstrate the need for continued vigilance from this Council. We call on Council members to join us and Greece in renewing the request contained in Security Council Resolution 2722 that the Secretary General inform the Council of Houthi attacks on merchant and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. Similarly, we call on Council members to ensure the functioning of the Yemen Panel of Experts, a critical tool in providing this Council with information about violations of the arms embargo under Security Council Resolution 2216. Unfortunately, one member of this Council continues to impede the appointment of the arms expert to this panel. The United States calls for the expert's immediate appointment. This obstructionism empowers Iran's defiance of the UN's arms embargo. Iran enables the Houthis to attack Israel, threaten and blackmail our partners in the Gulf, and to play a role in Iran's terror networks across the wider Middle East region. This Council must not tolerate Iran's violations of its resolutions. Another critical tool for the UN in enforcing Security Council Resolution 2216 is the UN Verification and Inspection Mechanism. UNVIM has improved the efficiency and effectiveness of its operations through physical inspection of 100% of containerized cargo. Again, we urge member states to donate directly to UNVIM, which needs only $11 million per year to operate at full capacity. However, the UN mission to support the Hudaydah agreement, UNMAHA, has outlived its usefulness. It is mandated to lead a non-functioning committee tasked with overseeing activities that have long been superseded by circumstances. We believe it is time to sunset this mission. Finally, once again, we remind Council members that UNVIM clearance does not exonerate vessels from consequences arising from the U.S. designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. Knowingly providing material support or resources to an FTO is a violation of U.S. law. The United States remains committed to depriving the Houthis of the resources that sustain their terrorist actions and network. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement and would now like to give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, and the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher. We thank them for informative briefings. We also listen very closely to the representative of the civil society, Ms. Summer Nasser. The situation in Yemen continues giving rise to serious concern. The internal political and the socio-economic instability continue against a background of a considerable risk that active hostilities may resume. The number of armed incidents along the front line has gone up, and any such incident could become an uncontrolled clash. The country is feeling lack of foodstuffs, medicines, and fuel. There are power outages, and there is a growing inflation, which leads to rising prices. All of this compounds the everyday difficulties ordinary Yemenis feel. The number of people who are in need of humanitarian assistance is at a critically high level. It's almost 20 million people. Another problem that's remaining is insufficient funding for the humanitarian response plan, and the already paltry resources of the UN in this country are dwindling very rapidly. To date, the issue having to do with the UN and humanitarian staff detained by Ansar Allah is unresolved. But the main reason for the worsening situation on the ground, as well as for the undermining of humanitarian efforts, the main reason for that is a lack of progress on the political track. We still see no alternative to resuming a sustainable negotiating process following the roadmap for the Yemeni settlements. The provisions of this have to be endorsed as binding agreements between warring parties. What is important is to make sure that work continues to create the conditions for a fully fledged inclusive dialogue, including all of the Yemeni protagonists, including Ansar Allah. We do support the mediation efforts made by Envoy Grunberg. It's important to make sure that we do not lower our level of attention to organizing negotiations between countries, as well as towards stimulating small steps aimed at strengthening interaction between them on practical issues. This is the only line that could lead us to sustainable peace. Further stagnation of the situation could result in large-scale destabilization, deteriorating situation in the region as a whole. Mr. President, the internal problems in Yemen are accompanied by the also difficult situation in the nearby marine areas. After several months of relative calm, unfortunately, we're witnessing renewed attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. We condemn the most recent incidents, which resulted in a loss of life, and we express condolences to their families and wish a speedy recovery to the injured. Russia does not accept any action which threatens the safety of crews, cargo, and also threatens the freedom of international navigation. And we urgently call on avoiding such steps and restoring the calm in the waters of Yemen. Another very alarming point here is continued confrontation between Israel and Ansar Allah. There are increasing strikes against the territory of the Jewish state, including civilian objects, and also the disproportionate attacks by Western Jerusalem against the territory of sovereign Yemen. For example, in the early hours of the 7th of July, Israel had a massive strike using missiles and bombs on entities in Hodeidah, and Hodeidah is the area through which most of the vital goods arrive in the country. Civilian infrastructure entities were struck, including the ports of Hodeidah, Salifa, Ras Isa, and a power station in Ras Katif. The Galaxy Leader vessel was critically injured, and the fragments of this strike hit the Sia tanker in Ras Isa, and Russian sailors were on board of that vessel. We do not support the strikes against Israel, but would like to underscore that such disproportionate actions on the part of Western of Jerusalem are unacceptable and could lead to the most severe of consequences. What we need to do is to make sure that the vicious circle of violence is broken. Mr. President, nor can we ignore the obvious link between what's being done by Ansar Allah and the continued military operation by Israel in Gaza. It is the action by West Jerusalem which resulted in a growing number of victims amongst the Palestinians that trigger the escalation of the conflict and broaden its geography to the entire Middle East. Continued plight of the civilian Palestinians results in the reaction on the part of the Arab Street and a number of regional players, including the Houthi movement. The only way of stopping the spiral of violence has been and always is, of course, an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza, and also restoring unimpeded humanitarian access for the UN throughout the Gaza Strip, as is required by the numerous decisions passed by the Security Council and the GA. This is the only way that we can expect that there will be a normalization of the regional situation, including Yemen and surrounding waters. Mr. President, against this background, keeping the UN presence in Yemen is something that's taking on special importance. And this is a task that's being successfully implemented by the UN mission in Hodeidah. For many years, it's been a stabilizing factor on the ground, helps de-escalate the situation surrounding the ports on the Red Sea and making sure that they remain civilian in nature. They continue monitoring the Stockholm agreements. They support interaction between parties through the UN Redeployment Coordination Committee. And most importantly, the work done by the UN there helps maintain a minimal level of interaction with the opposite parties. And this is of key importance at a minimum to make sure there's unimpeded humanitarian access. And therefore, extending the mandate of the mission at this stage is a necessary step, which would enable us to hope that this way we will be able to prevent an inevitable deterioration of this situation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement and would now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Special Envoy Mr. Grunberg, Under Secretary General Mr. Fletcher, and CAO from Yemeni Aid Mrs. Somer Nasser for their informative briefings today. I also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in our meeting. Mr. President, unfortunately, in the past few days, we are witnessing an alarming resumption and escalation of Houthis' aggressiveness against commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea region. Just a couple of days ago, on the 6th and 7th of July, Houthis launched 2 consecutive, prolonged and sophisticated attacks against the Liberian-flagged Greek-operated bulk carriers Magic Seas and Eternity Sea, a few nautical miles away from the Hodeidah port. The attacks resulted in the sinking of both ships and the loss of 3 crew members thus far, while 16 persons are missing, according to available information at this time. We express our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims, and we sincerely hope that all missing persons will be found soon. Greece is actively engaged in this endeavor for the first moment. The European Naval Operation Aspides immediately coordinated the mobilization of all available means in the region to offer assistance to the attacked crew members, although no prior request for protection or escort was submitted in both cases. Mr. President, let us be clear. Both attacks were launched in a well-planned and elaborated manner, with great ferocity and with the use of advanced weaponry, including drones, RPG-type anti-tank rockets and anti-ship missiles, those pointing to well-trained and fully equipped forces. Greece condemns in the strongest possible terms these blatant attacks and calls for the immediate and unconditional cessation of Houthis' violence against the lives of seafarers in international shipping. We have a collective responsibility to protect seafarers whose everyday contribution to international maritime trade is crucial. Any form of threats to their lives and well-being is totally unacceptable and unjustified. Mr. President, this Council cannot disregard the reality. Houthis' action poses a constant and substantial threat to regional peace and stability, undermining the freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Red Sea region, a vital international shipping corridor whose disruption affects us all. Houthis' indiscriminate and continuous acts of violence cannot be justified under any pretext. They must immediately cease all those acts of violence. There will be no long-lasting stability in the region unless the peace negotiation process in Yemen is back on track. Greece underscored its unwavering support to the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and his tireless effort to engage all relevant actors into an inclusive, Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the UN auspices with full respect of the sovereignty, territorial integrity and unity of Yemen. The stability of the Red Sea region is an integral part of this process. Regional actors' contribution towards this direction remains crucial. We further call on all member states to respect and faithfully implement the targeted arms embargo and prevent any illicit transfers of advanced weaponry and training to the Houthis, consistent with Council Resolution 2216 of 2025 and 2624 of 2022. As it is evident, UNAVFOR Aspides, through its purely defensive posture, contributes substantially in safeguarding maritime security and the protection of international shipping industry and seafarers. Mr. President, in closing, we reiterate our steadfast commitment to the protection of navigational rights and freedom in the Red Sea region and remain ready to further engage with fellow member states on this important matter. In this respect, as the US representative pointed out, we call on our fellow Security Council members to work towards the renewal of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2768. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement and would now give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by expressing our appreciation to Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, USG Tom Fletcher for their comprehensive briefing, and I do express my appreciation to Ms. Summer Nasser for her briefings vividly describing the situation on the ground and valuable recommendations. We meet today amid troubling signs that tensions in and around Yemen have become newly inflamed. It is particularly worrying that the Houthis have launched their first attack against Israel since the fragile Iran-Israel ceasefire was enacted. We have also witnessed a resumption of Houthis' attack on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. Against this backdrop, I would like to highlight the following points. First, the Republic of Korea condemns the recent hostile acts carried out by the Houthis in the Red Sea and in the wider region, and once again strongly urges the Houthis to cease all dangerous provocations. Houthi recently asserted that their operations will persist until the aggression against Gaza stops and the siege is lifted. Such words and actions by the Houthis only undermine ongoing efforts toward a ceasefire. The Houthis acted upon their conviction by resuming attacks against Israel. Furthermore, the recent strikes on 2 Greek-owned bulk carriers, which led to the death of 4 crews in the Red Sea for the first time in a year, underscore the persistent and acute threat they pose to maritime security and the stability of the region. The Security Council must maintain its united voice to condemn the Houthi attacks on the merchant and the commercial vessels in the Red Sea. In this regard, we believe monitoring and reporting on the Houthi aggression is essential to ensure that the Council remains fully informed. Second, we urge all parties to ensure full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, especially for vulnerable groups, including women and children. The June CAG report identifies denial of humanitarian access as the leading cause of child death in Yemen. As OCHA has emphasized, restrictions on food aid are taking the heaviest toll on women and children. Furthermore, recent attacks on critical infrastructure only exacerbate civilian suffering. We reiterate the urgent need to uphold international humanitarian law and call for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure under all circumstances. Third, we call on all UN member states to faithfully implement all relevant Security Council resolutions, including the arms embargo. The situation in and around Yemen is a stark reminder that when Security Council resolutions are not fully implemented as designed, peace and stability in the region are severely compromised. The Republic of Korea also underscores once again the importance of the UN verification and inspection mechanism, UNVIM, which plays a vital role in both enforcing the arms embargo and alleviating Yemen's long-standing humanitarian suffering. Fourth, we hope that the glimmers of hope that have witnessed on the ground will lead to more breakthrough. As USG Tom Fletcher just briefed, the recent reopening of a vital access road between Sanas and Aden was one positive example of cooperation and showed that where there is a will, there's a way. In another positive development, the water authorities of Thais agreed to cooperate across the front lines, alleviating the suffering of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni people. We hope that all parties, especially the Houthis, will build on these encouraging developments to create tangible benefits for their people and restore trust. Lastly, Mr. President, we note with appreciation Special Envoy Grunberg's ongoing efforts toward a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political transition, particularly his recent engagement with women's group and civil society in Aden to hear their voices and their hopes for peace. The Republic of Korea reaffirms its firm support for an inclusive political process and the realization of peace and stability for all Yemenis. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thanking the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thanks also to the Special Envoy Grunberg and Under-Secretary General Fletcher for their briefings and their relentless efforts. We also thank Ms. Nasser for sharing first-hand testimony and perspectives from Yemeni civil society. And we thank all for their recommendations and messages to the Council. And of course, we welcome permanent representative of Yemen in the chamber. President, since our last discussion on Yemen at the Council, the region has seen further escalation, for which is still reeling. Regrettably, hostilities between the Houthis and Israel continue, and this week saw the resumption of attacks by the Houthis against commercial vessels in the Red Sea. We condemn the attacks against the vessel Magic Seas, and Eternity Sea, which have tragically resulted in the loss of civilian lives. These attacks threaten regional peace and security and have potentially direct humanitarian, environmental, and commercial consequences. In response, EU Operation Aspides continues to play its part to safeguard maritime security and freedom of navigation. We also condemn continued Houthis' targeting of Israel, as well as strikes by Israel against critical civilian infrastructure in Yemen. International humanitarian law must be respected by all and at all times. We echo the Secretary General in calling for de-escalation, diplomacy, and dialogue. There is a clear need for maximum restraint by all parties in a region already marked by turmoil. Meanwhile, President, for a decade, the Yemeni people have been trapped in a vicious cycle of food insecurity. The deepening humanitarian crisis continues to cause immense suffering across the country. Ms. Nasser's compelling briefing today has left us in no doubt about the scale and urgency of the situation. The recently published IPC figures for Yemen, as outlined by Under-Secretary General Fletcher, paint a stark picture of whole communities on the brink of famine, or what is classified as catastrophic levels of food insecurity, as early as September. It is clear that collective action is needed to prevent yet another human tragedy from becoming a legacy of our generation. We repeat our call for the release of all UN and humanitarian personnel detained by the Houthis, which is not only inhumane, but compounds the already dire situation. Likewise, we call for the release of all detained journalists and members of civil society. President, last month we spoke of the remarkable resilience of the Yemeni people and the power of local leadership, welcoming the agreement reached to open a key road connecting Aden and Sana'a, which is already delivering dividends. Today, Slovenia welcomes the report by Under-Secretary General Fletcher on the engagement of the United Nations to manage the water supply and restore water access on both sides of the front line. We know that one of the most pressing and sometimes overlooked consequences of war is disruption to water and sanitation services. Slovenia hopes that this agreement can help to restore Yemeni livelihoods and address a host of other interconnected issues, from malnutrition to spread of disease. It is clear that progress is possible. What is required is courage and commitment by all parties, a commitment to peace and to the needs and aspirations of the Yemeni people above all. We repeat our long-standing and urgent call for reinvigorated discussions on a nationwide ceasefire and progress towards an inclusive UN-led peace process. We cannot agree more with Special Envoy's statement that military option is an illusion. Further escalation, further violence serves no one. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement and would now like to give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, first of all, I wish to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General, Mr. Grunsberg, and the Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher. I also thank the CEO of Yemen Aid, Ms. Summer Nasser. I thank them all for their enlightening briefings. I also welcome the presence today of our colleague, the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Mr. President, France condemns in the very strongest terms the resumption of the Houthi attacks against commercial vessels in the Red Sea. These attacks have killed and wounded several mariners. These attacks are another unacceptable impediment to the freedom of navigation and a threat to the stability of the region as a whole. These attacks must cease without delay, as must the constant attacks waged by the Houthis against Israel. This Council must condemn them unanimously and unambiguously. France will continue its engagement within the defensive operation under the EU Security and Defence Policy, Aspides. This in order to protect maritime security and the freedom of navigation in accordance with international law, and we will do this shoulder to shoulder with our partners. France once again deplores the unacceptable suffering inflicted upon civilians. We are concerned by the conclusions of the latest report of the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification on Yemen that was published the end of June, and it refers to the risk of famine. The Houthis must stop impeding the delivery of aid and must allow the 17 million Yemenis going hungry and in need of urgent humanitarian aid to access that aid. It is imperative that this Council call upon all parties to guarantee the protection of civilian populations and infrastructures, this in accordance with their obligations under IHL. We must continue to demand the unconditional release of arbitrarily detained humanitarian workers. These detentions were also illegal. Such appeals must also go hand in hand with efforts allowing immediate and safe humanitarian access to those in need, including by restoring supply channels and by supporting aid initiatives. Mr. President, everyone keeps in mind the two dimensions of a situation that has gone on too long and whose humanitarian effects and effects on regional stability are devastating in nature. One is internal, and it risks leading to the fragmentation of the country's unity. The Houthi taking power in Sana'a has been seen, as has their lack of will, hindering all efforts of national reconciliation. And that has fueled the group's ambitions to extend control over the country, fueled by Daesh and Al-Qaeda. International aid has been restricted. Houthis with Iran have waged a regional battle against Israel, against other countries, against the vessels in the Red Sea, and against humanitarian workers. This Council must unite to help those engaged in mediation efforts, to begin with the UN. All those involved in humanitarian efforts need the support from this Council. President Trump has announced a possible ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Indeed, he's announced that ceasefire, and it should allow a new chapter for Yemen and the region. We must restore trust between the parties. The Houthis must return to the negotiating table. Regional powers must facilitate the process that will be held under the aegis of the Special Envoy. France reiterates its full support for that process. The arms embargo must be rigorously enforced. Only a political solution will make it possible to put an end to the conflict. This solution must be inclusive and allow the full participation of Yemeni young people and women in the public life of their country. France reaffirms its commitment to the unity and stability of Yemen and regional security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement and would now like to give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And like others, let me also thank Special Envoy Grunberg and USG Fletcher for their substantial briefings, as well as Ms. Nasser for her analysis and concrete recommendations. Mr. President, after several months of calm, the situation is now again escalating. We strongly deplore the resumption of Houthi attacks against commercial shipping in the Red Sea this week, leading to the sinking of the vessel Magic Seas. We further denounce the attacks on the vessel Eternity Sea that caused the deaths of several crew members. Denmark also strongly condemns the Houthis' continued attacks on Israel. The destabilizing actions of the Houthis in Yemen, the Red Sea, and across the wider region remains a threat to maritime security and risk dragging Yemen further into regional conflict. They must cease immediately, and freedom of navigation must be respected in line with international law. We need to see renewed momentum in the peace efforts, critical to improving economic and humanitarian conditions in the country. Unfortunately, the Houthis' unacceptable involvement in broader regional tensions has continued to stall progress towards a roadmap for peace in Yemen. We are also concerned about the reported growing links between the Houthis and non-state actors such as Al-Qaeda. We stress the value of crucial confidence-building measures needed to pave the way for the resumption of an inclusive political process in line with the Special Envoy's efforts, who we continue to fully support. As we've heard today, the recent opening of the road between Aden and Sana'a is a welcome example of such measures, which we hope is only one of many. This opening demonstrates that with political will, progress is possible. Denmark will continue to support all efforts to this end, to de-escalate tensions and improve the security and humanitarian situation for ordinary Yemenis who have suffered too much for too long. Mr. President, as we've heard, the humanitarian situation in Yemen continues to deteriorate. 60% of the population requires humanitarian and protection assistance, a staggering increase of 1.5 million compared to just last year. Amidst this dire situation, Yemen continues to endure crisis upon crisis, marked by its status as one of the most climate-vulnerable countries globally. For the past months, devastating flooding has eroded livelihoods, displaced thousands, destroyed vital infrastructure, and contributed to a renewed countrywide cholera outbreak. This emergency unfolds at a time when hundreds of health facilities have been forced to close due to funding constraints. These humanitarian needs are further compounded by shortages of medical supplies, as well as frequent electricity cuts, all of which undermine life-saving efforts on the ground. As food insecurity is soaring, malnutrition levels rise, and epidemics spread, we must find new ways to meet the growing needs of the population in all of Yemen. Mr. President, while humanitarian aid can save lives, it is rendered powerless if it cannot reach those in need. Humanitarian organizations, including the UN, must be able to operate in security wherever the people require aid. This is a major issue in Yemen, where the operating environment for humanitarian workers remains extremely challenging. We call on the Houthis to ensure safe, rapid, and unimpeded humanitarian access to ensure assistance can reach all civilians in need. We reiterate our demands for the immediate and unconditional release of all those detained by the Houthis. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Pakistan. We thank Special Envoy Grunberg and USG Fletcher for their comprehensive briefings. We also express our appreciation to Ms. Nasser for her remarks on the dire humanitarian situation in Yemen. Pakistan remains deeply concerned over the protracted crisis in Yemen. Years of conflict have inflicted immense suffering on the Yemeni people. Political fragmentation, economic collapse, and environmental degradation have further exacerbated their plight. What began as an internal crisis has since assumed broader regional dimensions, with serious implications for international peace and security. As the Special Envoy said, the situation is fragile, volatile, and unpredictable. And we agree with his key point that there is no military solution to this conflict and that negotiations provide the best way forward. The situation requires urgent, collective, and constructive action. The risk of renewed hostilities could jeopardize the ongoing fragile peace efforts and further aggravate the civilian suffering. It is imperative to reinvigorate inclusive political negotiations and implement coordinated measures to address the interconnected political, humanitarian, and socio-economic challenges facing Yemen. In this regard, I would like to highlight 4 points. First, we call on all parties to build upon the December 2023 roadmap, which provides a credible basis for a sustainable political solution. The continued engagement of regional actors, particularly the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, is commendable. It has been instrumental in keeping the hope for the peace process alive. As Mr. Grunberg also noted, time was not on our side. A prolonged political stalemate can affect the gains made. All stakeholders must intensify efforts to break the political impasse and move decisively toward a Yemeni-owned and Yemeni-led political process under the auspices of the United Nations. We also appreciate and support the efforts of the Special Envoy, including his recent engagements, the meeting with the Yemeni Prime Minister, and interactions with members of the civil society and women leaders of political parties. Second, the volatile regional environment risks further destabilizing Yemen and the broader Middle East. We are deeply concerned on the recent escalation and attacks, including on ships and civilian infrastructure. Pakistan underscores the urgent need for de-escalation, dialogue, and diplomacy to preserve regional peace and stability. It goes without saying that durable peace in the Middle East requires an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and urgent, credible steps to realize Palestinian statehood in accordance with international legitimacy. Third, the humanitarian situation in Yemen remains dire. Over 18 million Yemenis, including women and children, require urgent life-saving assistance. The risk of famine continues to haunt, with millions facing acute food insecurity. We urge the international community to respond generously to OCHA's humanitarian appeal, reiterated also today by Mr. Fletcher and also noted by Ms. Nasser, to ensure predictable and sustained funding and support the scaling up of humanitarian operations. Fourth, we join other members in strongly condemning the continued arbitrary detention of UN personnel, humanitarian workers, and diplomatic staff by the Houthi authorities. These detentions, some ongoing since 2021, constitute a clear violation of international law and represent a serious impediment to the delivery of humanitarian assistance in the country. We reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained UN, diplomatic, and humanitarian personnel, and for full, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access throughout Yemen. Let me conclude by emphasizing that only a comprehensive approach anchored in inclusive political dialogue and urgent humanitarian action can pave the way for lasting peace and stability in Yemen. The Council must send a unified and unequivocal message. The people of Yemen deserve peace, dignity, and a future free from fear, hunger, and despair. Pakistan remains steadfast in its support for peace, stability, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Yemen. And in the pursuit of those objectives, we shall support all efforts aimed at achieving a just, inclusive, and durable resolution of this conflict. I'll now resume my function as the President of the Council and would now like to give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen.
At the outset, dear brother, Your Excellency Ambassador Asim, allow me to congratulate you and to congratulate Pakistan on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month. I extend to you and your delegation my sincere wishes for your success. I also thank your predecessor, the permanent representative of Guyana, for their successful presidency. I also thank Mr. Grunberg and Mr. Fletcher for their briefings. I also thank our sister Samar Nasser for her briefing. Mr. President, 11 years into this conflict, the steadfast Yemeni people continue to face immense economic challenges and a humanitarian crisis of immeasurable scale, prolonged by the war waged by the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist militias. Despite of the efforts of the Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government to advance a just, sustainable, and inclusive peace process, and despite their positive engagement with regional, international, and UN efforts through the Special Envoy to Yemen to end this conflict, the Houthi militias persist in their intransigence, prolonging the conflict and worsening the humanitarian crisis for the Yemenis. They persist in their plans to sustain violence and war, and to drag the Yemeni people to an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. We warn against the Iranian regime's interference in Yemen's affairs and the smuggling of weapons and military experts to the Houthi militias in a blatant violation of relevant Security Council resolutions, particularly resolutions 2216. Achieving peace and stability in Yemen requires the Houthi militias to demonstrate genuine commitment and goodwill by engaging positively in the regional and international peace efforts and UN efforts aiming at ending the Yemeni crisis by abandoning war and escalation and prioritizing the interests of the Yemeni people over their own and their backers' interests. They should renounce their approach, which is undermining security and stability in Yemen and the region. The Yemeni government warns against the consequences of the Houthis dragging Yemen and its people into destructive regional conflicts. We hold these militias and their backers fully responsible for the dire consequences resulting from reckless actions that could cause further crises in the country, including the militarization of international waterways, threatening food security, undermining the livelihoods of the Yemeni people, and worsening the humanitarian crisis. The adventures of these militias have harmed the interests of the Yemeni people, have destroyed their capabilities and resources, and despite the above, they continue their reckless adventures towards more destruction and devastation. The Houthi militias, which claim to seek peace, continue to commit daily grave violations against the Yemeni people in areas under their control in a flagrant breach of international humanitarian and human rights law. These include kidnapping UN staff and personnel of international NGOs operating in Yemen, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions. It also includes raiding and looting their offices, looting humanitarian aid, provoking crises to serve their destructive agendas, and exploiting the suffering of Yemenis for political blackmail. Houthi-controlled areas have become zones of repression and terror, and for the worst forms of violations against our people, including killing, abductions, torture, extortion, forced taxation, looting private and public properties, and the recruitment of thousands of children and sending them to the front lines. They have also planted hundreds of thousands of landmines and explosive devices indiscriminately in the various areas under their control to harm innocent civilians, particularly children, women, and the elderly. They have been sowing fear among peaceful civilians and perpetrating systematic violations, targeting the Yemenis in their life, their properties, and their livelihoods, in a blatant violation of all international instruments, humanitarian laws, and moral values. The most recent among these crimes was the heinous crime which occurred in Al Salafiyah district in the Raima Governorate, where the Houthis killed Sheikh Saleh Hantous and his grandson, injured his wife, after besieging his residence and waging an armed assault to demolish his house and burn down neighboring homes. This reflects the militia's brutality and their attempt to break the will of the Yemeni community and impose their destructive, imported project by force and terror. These crimes are part of a systematic pattern of criminality by these militias against the Yemenis. They reveal a revengeful mentality that does not respect the Yemeni people or the Yemeni land. It is a continuation of their destructive project aimed at undermining all forms of life, stability, and dignified livelihoods, and at terrorizing the population and displacing them. We reiterate that these crimes against the Yemeni people who refuse their oppressive racist project will not go unpunished. We call international organizations, human rights and legal organizations to document these crimes and violations, to protect victims, and to prevent the continuation of this systematic terrorism. Mr. President, the crime of maritime piracy by the Houthis recently, targeting the commercial vessel Magic Seas off the coast of Al Hudaydah in the Red Sea, underscores again the ongoing threat posed by their control over parts of Yemen's coastline. This directly endangers global maritime safety and security, global trade, and energy supply routes through the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandab, and the Gulf of Aden, using Yemen as a platform to destabilize the region and the world. In this context, we reaffirm that securing international maritime routes and maritime security and maintaining regional and international stability can only be achieved by restoring the Yemeni state and enabling the government to exercise authority over all the Yemeni territories and coastline, and ending the Iranian-backed coup that seeks to turn Yemen into a platform to threaten regional and international interests and to achieve their expansionist goals. The sinking of a vessel carrying approximately 17,000 metric tons of the highly dangerous ammonium nitrate threatens a major environmental disaster in Yemeni territorial waters and the Red Sea. This would also have catastrophic economic and humanitarian consequences for hundreds of thousands of Yemenis who depend on maritime resources in their livelihoods. The sinking of the vessel will also endanger the vessels passing through this vital maritime route in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb. The government of Yemen urges international organizations to swiftly address the issue of Magic Sea's tanker to prevent a major environmental catastrophe. We emphasize the need to establish effective international mechanisms to swiftly respond to such incidents and disasters, especially amidst continued Houthi direct attacks on oil and chemical tankers in international waters. Mr. President, I would like to draw the attention of the Council and the attention of the United Nations to a dangerous development. The Houthi militias, the terrorist Houthi militias, have seized the Nautica tanker, which the UN had acquired to replace the decaying sulfur tanker off the coast of Al-Hudaydah. In order to avert an environmental, economic, and humanitarian disaster in Yemen and the region, we had warned in August 2023 of the risk of the Houthis seizing Nautica to replace the sulfur tanker. We called upon the UN and the international community to implement the plan to guarantee that these militias cannot use the alternative tanker to serve their interests. The seizing by the Houthis of the Nautica tanker, transforming it into a floating reservoir to smuggle and keep Iranian oil, is a blatant violation of the agreements signed by the United Nations regarding the sulfur tanker. It also undermines the effort of the Council and of the United Nations. It is a dangerous precedent that jeopardizes the security and safety of UN operations and the operations of international organizations. These militias are using Nautica and sulfur despite the risk of sinking and explosion. These two tankers are under the control of the Houthi militias and are being used to store oil for the sake of these militias. Therefore, we call upon the Security Council and the United Nations to shoulder their responsibilities and to swiftly investigate in this incident. We call them to restore the full role of the United Nations in overseeing the tanker and to prevent the Houthis to use the tankers to serve their interests, and we call for holding the perpetrators accountable. Mr. President, the economic and services situation is the most important challenge for the Leadership Council and the government of Yemen. It has our utmost priority. In this context, the Yemeni government pursues the economic, financial, administrative reforms, and we are living up to our commitments and working on improving the economic situation and the delivery of services, especially electricity and energy. We are seeking to pay the salaries of the civil servants, to provide essential services, improve the value of the national currency, fight corruption, improve and rationalize expenses to achieve financial and monetary stability. We have adopted several measures to overcome the current challenges, which have directly affected the ability of the government to provide basic services, to alleviate the daily suffering of the citizens in light of the current difficult circumstances and in light of the lack of oil exports and its direct impact on our living and economic situation. The government of Yemen calls upon brotherly and friendly countries and international organizations to support our efforts in order to provide basic services and to shoulder our commitments and in order to promote economic stability and meet the needs of the current stage. This support complements the efforts of the international and regional community to achieve peace and to restore stability and security in Yemen and to invest in regional and international peace and security. In this context, we highly appreciate the stance of our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and UAE, who stood by the Yemeni people. Their economic, developmental, and humanitarian interventions were an important factor to allow the government to live up to its commitments in the previous years. To conclude, Mr. President, the Leadership Presidential Council and the government of Yemen reaffirmed their commitment to peace and to supporting all regional and international efforts and endeavors and the efforts of the United Nations through its Special Envoy for Yemen in order to achieve a just, comprehensive, and sustainable peace based on the political settlement agreed upon and notably relevant Security Council resolutions, particularly Resolution 2216. We reaffirm that the success of any political approach to achieve peace and end the Yemeni crisis requires addressing the root causes of this crisis, particularly the coup by the Houthi militias against the state and its constitutional institutions and against national consensus and the aspirations of the Yemeni people. Therefore, there is a need to stop the destructive approach of these militias, destabilizing Yemen, the region, and the world. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Yemen for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on this subject. The meeting is adjourned.